Billionaire CEO was lost without an Arab translator, until the black maid spoke and stunned everyone. The boardroom was frozen. Not from the air conditioning, though it did hum with that hospital cold chill, but from silence. That thick, high-stakes silence that settles when no one wants to say the wrong thing. At the head of the polished walnut table, Mitchell Crane, the tech billionaire with his signature navy suit and unwavering jawline, sat helpless. For the first time in his 23-year rise to the top, words were failing him. Across from him sat a potential investor. A man in his 50s, quiet eyes, wearing an elegant Arabic traditional dress. He spoke softly, in Arabic, waiting patiently for anyone to understand. Mitchell's translator had missed their flight. The backup, stuck in traffic. His entire future, his next-level smart city project, hinged on this conversation. One missed connection could cost him everything. Around the table, a dozen executives and assistants stared blankly. Not one person could bridge the gap. And then, from the far corner of the room, by the coffee cart, half hidden behind a tray of croissants, a voice rose. Warm, confident, clear. I believe he's asking about the energy grid infrastructure in Phase 2. Every head turned. There stood Delilah, housekeeping uniform pressed, hands still gloved. A woman the room had never truly seen until now. Mitchell blinked, then smiled. Something was shifting. Not just in the room, but in him. Before we dive into this story, a quick like and subscribe helps us keep telling stories like this one. Stay with us. This story is just beginning. The room didn't breathe. Mitchell's smile had barely formed before it faltered, curiosity flickering in his eyes, but nowhere else. Across the long table, a few executives exchanged awkward glances. A cough. A whisper. Delilah felt the weight of every stare land on her like gravel. She didn't move. The man across the table, the investor, lifted his brows with a small, impressed nod. He repeated his sentence in Arabic, gesturing politely toward the documents in front of Mitchell. Delilah spoke again. Steady. Calm. He wants clarification on the solar integration projections, especially your claim about zero-loss transmission. He says it sounds optimistic. Another silence. This time, it wasn't just awkward. It was charged. A voice sliced through. Excuse me, said Vanessa Greer, Chief Operating Officer, heels clicking as she rose from her chair, smooth and sharp like glass. Mitchell, with all due respect, we should wait for a certified translator. This isn't... She turned, glancing briefly at Delilah's badge. Standard protocol. Laughter rippled softly down the table. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Delilah stood still, spine straight. Not angry, not wounded, just present. Mitchell leaned forward, eyes never leaving her. You speak Arabic? He asked, voice low. Yes, she said. My mother taught English to immigrant families, mostly Arabic speakers. I picked it up from the kids she tutored. My mother made me practice with them every day. At the time, I didn't understand why. Until I was older. She took a breath. But I understand now. A pause. Mitchell studied her for a moment longer, then turned to the investor, gesturing for Delilah to continue. Vanessa stiffened. I'm sorry, Mitchell, she said, softer now but still sharp. You can't just allow housekeeping to lead an international negotiation. There are legal. Mitchell raised a hand. Not rude but firm. Delilah, he said. If you're comfortable, please, go on. Delilah nodded once. And just like that, she stepped forward. Not into a spotlight. Into her own life. They didn't know. They hadn't seen her rising every morning at 4:45 a.m., catching 2 buses and a train to reach this downtown tower before the sun even touched the mirrored glass. They hadn't seen her sweeping floors while quietly reciting Arabic poetry to keep her fluency sharp. Hadn't noticed her slipping industry white papers into her bag from the recycling bins and studying them at night while her daughter slept. They didn't know that behind her measured tone was a heart that had been forged, not polished. She remembered the way her mom used to grip her hand outside the library, whispering, "Language opens locked doors. Baby girl, you never know which one you'll need to walk through." Now here she was, turning the key. The meeting resumed, but it wasn't the same. Delilah translated, sentence by sentence, detail by detail. No falter, no embellishment, just clarity. Pure, deliberate clarity. The investor listened with quiet focus, occasionally smiling at her phrasing. He asked follow-up questions, specific, technical ones. Delilah didn't answer for Mitchell, but she translated every word with precision, respecting the integrity of both voices. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. One of the other board members, Carter from legal, whispered something behind a hand, clearly unconvinced. To them, this was a fluke, a bizarre moment that would pass. But Mitchell saw something else. He watched Delilah not just speak, but bridge. She didn't command the room, but the room moved with her. He remembered their earlier conversations, short, polite ones in passing. He had never asked her name, never even wondered. And now she was saving a deal his entire future rested on. But she didn't speak with revenge. She didn't act like someone demanding to be noticed. She just showed up. The conversation ended with a handshake. The investor stood, thanked Delilah in Arabic, and handed Mitchell a signed letter of intent. Soft smile, firm grip. The deal was back on track. As the door closed behind him, the boardroom exhaled. Mitchell turned to Delilah. "Would you stay for a moment?" Vanessa stood too. "Mitchell, I have a call with legal in 5. He nodded toward the door. "Take it in your office." The message was clear. When the room cleared, Delilah began to gather her cleaning cart, avoiding his gaze. "You know," Mitchell said, voice thoughtful, "I used to believe every room I walked into already had what I needed. The right team, the right talent, the right plan." He paused. "But today, I realized I've been looking in the wrong direction." Delilah didn't answer. He continued, "You didn't have to speak up, but you did. And you did it with grace." Delilah met his eyes. "I didn't do it for you." He smiled softly. "I know." A long moment passed. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a card, and placed it gently on the table. "I'd like to offer you a position," he said. "Official. Full-time. Not just because you speak Arabic. Because you see what others don't. And you care enough to act." Delilah looked down at the card. Corporate Affairs Liaison. It wasn't the title that hit her. It was the fact that, finally, someone saw what she'd been quietly building all along. Mitchell nodded once. "Think about it." He turned to leave, but before he stepped out, he added, "And tell your daughter, her mom changed the game today." As the door clicked shut behind him, Delilah stood still, the echo of her mother's voice ringing like church bells in her chest. "Language opens locked doors, baby girl. You never know which one you'll need to walk through." The next morning, the air in the 47th floor conference room was different. Not colder, not quieter, just watchful. Word had spread. Executives arrived early, straightened ties, hushed their chatter as Mitchell entered. Vanessa stood by the window, arms crossed, carefully composed. And in the corner, again by the coffee cart, near the fresh fruit bowl, Delilah stood. But this time her cart was parked outside the door. She wasn't there to clean. Mitchell had asked her to join the morning strategy meeting. Just to listen, he'd said. Maybe weigh in. No title yet. No announcement. Just a quiet invitation to stand where she'd never stood before. Vanessa's eyes flicked over as Delilah entered. One beat too long. The meeting began. A screen flickered to life with charts and blueprints. Phase 2 of the Smart City rollout. The room buzzed with numbers, zoning codes, supply chain updates. Technical language flew across the table like fastballs. Mitchell watched silently. Delilah, seated at the edge, took notes. It wasn't until the new regional consultant, a polished man with a mouth that moved faster than his thoughts, presented a risky shortcut involving subcontractors and waived inspections that things shifted. "We'll save 6 months," he said confidently, tapping the screen. "The materials pass code in some states. Close enough for what we need." There was a pause, some nodding, some unsure murmurs. Then Delilah spoke. "No," she said clearly. "It won't hold." The room turned. Not rudely, but sharply. All eyes on her. Vanessa raised a brow. Excuse me? Delilah didn't shrink. The fiber mesh blend in that material fails stress testing at high temperatures. Passed in colder regions, but this site's going up in Nevada. Desert sun will break it down in 5 years. Maybe less. Silence. The consultant smirked. I'm sorry, and your background is? Delilah folded her hands. You can find the failure data in a 2021 white paper from the American Construction Standards Institute. Appendix C. I read it on my lunch break 2 weeks ago. She let that land. Then, also, your permit proposal bypasses local inspection schedules. If we're audited, you'll lose the entire project timeline and public trust. You won't save 6 months, you'll lose 18. The room was dead still. Carter from legal leaned forward. She's right. I just checked. T's in the database. Mitchell leaned back in his chair. Calm. But behind his eyes, something ignited. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Her fingers twitched once near her pen. The consultant cleared his throat, paled slightly, and sat down. Delilah didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just returned to her notes. Mitchell finally spoke. That, he said, quiet but firm, is the kind of clarity we've been missing. He turned to the team. From this point forward, Delilah is joining our project development panel. She'll review materials, proposals, and vendor communications. Vanessa's face hardened. Mitchell, we have protocols. He met her eyes. We also have problems. Delilah just solved 2. A few others around the table nodded. Slowly, respectfully. Delilah didn't flinch. But inside, something shifted. She saw it now in their eyes. Not pity. Not performance. Recognition. And underneath it all, something far more personal. She remembered the night 2 years ago when she sat in the emergency room, cradling her daughter's hand after an asthma attack. Insurance had lapsed. Bills piled up. She took the overnight shift cleaning the corporate floors because it paid more. She thought then she'd buried her old dreams, communications, languages, public policy. She'd told herself survival is enough. But every night she read. Every weekend she studied. Every ignored moment had quietly become preparation. And now, in this room of glass and steel, those unseen hours stood tall beside her. Mitchell stood. We've spent years hiring the same voices, the same minds, and expecting new results. Delilah is proof that excellence doesn't always wear a name tag we recognize. He turned to her. Welcome to the team. Delilah looked around the room. No applause. No ceremony. Just the quiet, real weight of having earned it. She stood slowly, offered a small nod. Thank you, she said. Not for the opportunity. For finally being seen. The room emptied slower than usual. Not because the meeting had run long, but because something had changed, and no one quite knew how to walk away from it. Papers were gathered gently. Laptops closed with care. The usual clatter of chairs and murmured complaints were absent. People moved like they didn't want to make noise in a room where something sacred had just happened. Delilah stood near the wall, hands still by her sides, as if unsure whether to stay or step away. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't glowing. Just steady. The way a mountain doesn't gloat for being tall, it just is. Vanessa lingered by the window. She didn't look at Delilah at first. Just stared out over the skyline, the light from the sun painting the glass in warm gold. Then softly, without turning, she spoke. I looked up the white paper, she said. Delilah nodded once. It's thorough. Vanessa finally turned, arms crossed more loosely now. The sharpness in her face had faded, replaced with something quieter. Not exactly regret, but understanding. I underestimated you, she said. Not an apology, but not a defense either. I was wrong to dismiss you. Delilah didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Some things feel truer in silence. Then she offered a simple, even reply. You weren't the only one. That landed somewhere deep in the room. Vanessa gave a small nod, barely more than a breath, and walked out without another word. A different woman than the one who'd arrived. Across the table, Carter from legal lingered. He approached Delilah slowly, like someone approaching a vault they'd once believed was empty. That insight on zoning risk, he said, holding his tablet. We've been going back and forth on it for months. You spotted it in 30 seconds. I've been following the city's permit reform policies, Delilah replied. Most of it's buried in public notices, but it's all there if you track it. Carter scratched his chin. Would you consider sitting in on our compliance team's next review? Delilah's eyebrows lifted slightly. She didn't smile, just nodded. I'd be happy to, she said. He smiled, genuinely this time, and walked off, leaving behind the faintest trace of something new. Respect. Mitchell stood a few feet away, arms folded, watching the subtle shift in the room like a conductor listening to the echo after the final note. He walked over, slower this time, not as a CEO, just a man trying to understand something bigger than he'd realized was right in front of him. You held your ground today, he said. Delilah looked at him, steady. I didn't come here to prove anything. I know, he said. That's why it mattered. He paused, as if deciding whether to share the next thought. Then he did. My father was a construction worker, he said. He spoke very little English. Everyone thought he was just the guy who poured concrete. But he understood blueprints better than the architects. Taught me how to read them before I could ride a bike. Delilah's eyes softened slightly. I forgot what it looks like when knowledge hides in plain sight, he said. They stood for a moment in that quiet understanding. No titles, no roles, just two people who knew what it meant to be overlooked. Then, a voice behind them. Ms. Delilah? It was Jenna, the intern. Young, bright-eyed, a little nervous. She held a notepad in one hand and a pen in the other. I was wondering if you'd be willing to look at my Arabic vocabulary workbook sometime? I'm studying for certification and you're just really good. Delilah smiled then. Small. Real. Of course, she said. Bring it by during your lunch. Jenna nodded eagerly, then dashed off. The room was almost empty now. Delilah looked out the wide glass window. The city stretched below, loud and brilliant and unforgiving. But it didn't scare her. Not anymore. She felt her phone buzz in her pocket. A text from her daughter. Mom, can I tell my class what you did? My teacher said it's amazing. Delilah's eyes shimmered just a little, but she didn't let the tear fall. She typed back, yes, baby. Tell them to always speak up, especially when it's not expected. She slid her phone away. One last voice broke the quiet. Mitchell, still beside her, said, You ever thought about teaching? Delilah chuckled under her breath. Every day. He smiled. Then maybe this building isn't your final stop. Just the first one with doors unlocked. Delilah looked back at the conference table, where, just yesterday, she had been invisible. Today they saw her, not as a token, not as a miracle, but as herself. A month later, Delilah walked through the front doors of Crane Tower, not with a mop in her hand, but with a leather satchel over her shoulder and a badge clipped to her blouse that read Director of Cultural and Strategic Communications. Same building, same marble floor, same guards, by the front desk. But now, when they saw her, they stood a little straighter, smiled a little wider. Morning, Ms. Delilah, one said as she passed. She nodded, calm and gracious. Morning, Sam. The elevator ride to the 47th floor used to feel like a trip into someone else's world. Now it felt like the ground rising to meet her. The office suite had been updated, but nothing flashy. A quiet space, warm lighting, a table with chairs, not a desk with walls. She'd insisted on that. She wanted the space to invite conversation, not hierarchy. A whiteboard stood on one wall, already filled with ideas, community partnerships, multilingual outreach, mentoring programs for underrepresented youth. Each note had a name next to it, not just hers. She wasn't building a throne. She was building a table. Later that morning, Vanessa knocked gently before entering. She didn't hover, didn't stiffen, just stepped in, notebook in hand. Morning, she said. I was hoping to run the equity presentation by you before we finalize. Delilah nodded. Of course. Sit. They reviewed the language together, adjusting terms, refining phrasing. Delilah offered a few suggestions, not to simplify but to clarify. Language wasn't just about being heard. It was about being understood. Vanessa took notes, listened, asked questions. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. When they finished, Vanessa stood, then paused at the door. You know, she said, almost awkwardly, I've been learning Arabic on my phone. Delilah smiled. Keep going. It opens doors. Vanessa nodded once and stepped out, leaving behind the faint echo of old walls quietly coming down. By noon, the small conference room down the hall had filled with young interns and junior staff. It was the second week of Delilah's Hidden Strength Workshops, a series she designed for anyone in the company who'd ever felt overlooked or unheard. The theme today, preparation in the shadows. She stood in front of the group, sleeves rolled up, speaking with a whiteboard marker in one hand and quiet confidence in the other. No one saw me when I was reading city policy at 2 a.m., she said. No one asked why I carried language flashcards in my apron pocket. The room leaned in. I wasn't doing it to impress anyone. I was doing it because one day, I knew someone would need what I carried. And when that moment came, she paused. I wanted to be ready. The room was silent in the best way. Then a hand went up, a young man from IT. What kept you going when no one noticed? Delilah thought for a moment, then smiled. I noticed. That evening, after most of the building had gone quiet, Mitchell stepped into her office. You've started something here, he said, watching the soft light fall across the table. The way people talk, ask questions, they're thinking differently. Delilah didn't brush off the compliment, but she didn't bask in it either. It's not me, she said. It's the mirror. They're just finally seeing what's been there all along. He nodded. I'm expanding the mentorship budget, he said. Double, maybe triple, whatever you need. I want this to grow. She looked at him, calm, clear. It already is. Before leaving for the night, Delilah made one last stop, downstairs to the janitorial supply closet. She didn't need anything, just stood in the doorway for a quiet minute. Same shelves, same hum of the overhead light, same smell of lemon, cleaner and possibility. She knelt briefly, ran her fingers along the floor where her cart used to roll, closed her eyes, not in sadness, in gratitude. Then she stood and walked away, without looking back. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Horns, footsteps, voices layered over voices. But inside her, a new rhythm had taken root. Not loud, not rushed, just sure. Delilah stepped into the evening light, the sky painted soft with gold and lavender. The breeze lifted her hair slightly as she walked to the corner where her daughter waited with her backpack and a wide grin. Hey, Ma, she said, running up. Hey, baby. Did you help more people today? Delilah knelt and pulled her close. Every day, she said. And soon so will you. They crossed the street together. No spotlight, no stage. Just a woman who had once been unseen, now walking into the future she built with her own hands. Have you ever felt invisible in a room you knew you could light up? So you're not alone. Delilah's story reminds us that strength doesn't always shout, and that the most powerful voices often rise from the quietest corners. So what hidden strength are you carrying? Share your story in the comments. Tell us what you're ready to step into. And if this touched you, share it. Subscribe for more stories like this. Your voice matters. It's time the world hears it.